Techlandia is recorded at the Central Office on the East Side in Portland. Central Office is a one stop for all your office or meeting needs. Check them out at centraloffice.com.
Welcome to the latest episode of Techlandia, Tao's regular podcast series. I'm Skip Newberry, President and CEO of Tao. And with us, we're pleased to have as our guest, Mike Biglan, who's the founder and CEO of DevSwarm. Mike, welcome.
Wonderful. Thank you. Glad to be here, Skip.
Well, would love to start off by asking you if you could take a few minutes to talk about your professional journey. How did you end up, let's say from the time that you started your career to the launch of DevSwarm? Take us through it.
Absolutely. Yeah, I started programming about 25 years ago now. So I did a few software classes in college and found out what it wasn't for me. And then it was only after that, when I was in DC, where I just sort of happened to stumble onto some databases and books and just got really enthralled with it, just kept wanting to read more and more. And so that sort of brought me into coding and learning and going and buying a bunch of undergrad textbooks and reading through them on my own time, and got me into really software development in general. Fast forward, I was the head of technology at Marco Polo, the video sharing app. And then 11 years ago, started 20 Ideas, which is now one of the largest software agencies in Oregon. I've been running that. We have our CTO, who has been with us. He was the first employee for more than 10 years. And he and I spun off a new company, DevSwarm, which we just launched about a month ago with some of the other team members of the future of AI coding. So that's sort of leaves us off to today.
Excellent. So in terms of the idea for DevSwarm, how did that come about?
This was one of the things over the last year, that sort of the core question has been, what does AI look like in terms of software development? There's all sorts of fads. There's different products coming out. One that we jumped on about a year ago is Cursor. Really, this is all down to the future of AI development, and it really has changes where things are going. About 6 months ago, when Claude Code came out and became a thing, there was a small number of people that really sort of jumped on it and started digging into it. And one of those was our CTO, Trevor, who really was using it and was blown away by it. That was the aha moment that Claude Code and things like it could actually produce a level of software, a level of code that was human quality in for a lot of circumstances. Not perfect everywhere, but something that did seem like now it's at the point to really be used, not just for a single file as you're kind of completing a file, but on a complete repository, on a code base. And at that moment, shortly after, the question was, well, there's a lot of waiting when you're using Claude Code or Codex or some of these. What can I do while I'm waiting? Is this, I go get some tea, I go outside, take a walk. And of course, one of the things you see across the course of innovation, when you had chips, CPUs go from megahertz to gigahertz and then sort of hit this plateau, then parallel became the thing that everyone started really focusing on. Multi-core, multi-processor. And this is the same type of thing. You see LLMs that are thinking and have a lot of information, and parallel is really sort of the next way to move beyond that. And so that was really the core of the interface, coming about that with, what does it look like if you were to use Claude Code or others like it in parallel? And then why just Claude Code? Claude Code might be the best at that point, but things are changing quickly, and there are going to be other software agents that are going to be the best thing very, very soon. And so why can't you just bring whatever coding assistant, coding agent you want? And really, it's not just sort of a working in parallel by itself, but this is really on different branches. This is how production grade software development happens, with version controlled repos like Git, and having those on different branches and these parallel isolated things in parallel on your desktop. And really just a tool that we didn't see anywhere around. We didn't see anyone going in that direction. We saw a lot of IDEs that were built the sort of the core structure of them 30 years ago, but those have not evolved. AI has been plugged into them, and there was room for the next generation, the next type of iteration to where software development was going.
on the first wave of a lot of AI adoption, most people would observe a lot of those projects weren't necessarily fit for purpose. In the MIT report that came out about a month or so ago, studying the fact that 95% of enterprise AI projects in the recent past have ended in failure. So in other words, a lot of the types of AI and its application weren't aligned with sort of the right types of business outcomes and use cases that should have been identified at the outset. And as you're starting to look at sort of the opportunity for DevSwarm, is it a combination of this sort of flexibility, interoperability, and customization and fit for purpose that you're bringing to the table when it comes to kind of the engineering context and how AI can best be applied in those environments?
Yeah, the MIT study was a fascinating one because it really stepped back and said, okay, let's see how AI is actually being used across all sorts of different. Is this for speeding up? This better for customer service? Is this for reducing operational costs? And software development is sort of one of those areas, one of those disciplines. My my assumption with why so many of those have not sort of seen the light of day is the expectations. There are many times that people will produce AI projects and think that they can just sort of run by themselves. They don't need much in terms of the things like observability, the human in the loop. And so what's built is an AI agent that can just do all these things, but then when they have problems, when they struggle, that's when the thing just doesn't work and they pretty much the only function is to turn it off. And so that sort of leads to essentially the hypothesis that I think a lot of people have been talking about for a while, that you need the human in the loop. And then the only question is, what does that look like? And observability is one of those pieces where you have agents working. You need to understand, especially at scale, what they're doing, how they're operating, and have some levels of controls, visibilities, and tunability as that's happening. So DevSwarm, I would say, happens to be in that space by the how can we generate software? How can a human generate software more quickly with production grade practices in that sort of narrow domain of software development? But at the core, it's the human in control. It's the coder in the loop. The coder stays in control with everything that's happening and is not saying, hey, just go make this code for me. I'm not even going to look at the code, which traditionally has been, or I should say lately has been called vibe coding. I I just want to see how this plays out.
Yesterday, I was at an event that we were putting on in the Portland area where one of the speakers was the chief data scientist for Block. And she was talking about, how she's seeing some trepidation on the part of some of the engineering teams around using and embracing AI, partly out of a fear of, potential obsolescence in terms of the
Yep.
contributions they've been making in the past. And also there's this sort of like a tension, if you will, there between, well, code is also a form of artistic expression to some developers and engineers, right? And so it's almost like you've got this comparison, and she used the metaphor like you've got a Kia quality or grade code, and then you've got artisanal. And right now, one of the challenges with AI and where you apply it is, where do you need to invest in the artisanal, and where is just a Kia grade good enough and fits the right sort of like business use case? And I'm wondering, have you seen some of this tension internally as you were thinking about launching DevSwarm? And I mean, you run one of the largest, custom software development firms in the state. Like, did you see some of this trepidation, and how did you overcome it if so?
Yeah, I mean, when you say internally, I think just to myself, I personally love the craft of creating code and the subtleties and the nuance and the details. So I put myself in that category. At the same time, Pandora's box is been opened. It's not closing back up. And so then the question is, what does it look like as this plays out in terms of producing? I also really enjoy being able to produce things even more quickly, have sort of ideas and be able to execute on them even more quickly. And so then one of the questions is, can you create the quality of code and at the level of security, robustness, scalability, but at the same time do it faster? and use and leverage AI to be able to do that faster. And that was one of the pieces where the question there are some tools and software out there that really just from their essence they talk about AI as sort of their people on your team, and you give this to your people on your team, and that feels sort of a 180 of what we think of on that front. We picture this as being, how can you have an individual that now can accomplish a lot more, but still be in control? It's really sort of the conductor of the orchestrator of being able to have all of those different ones in place as you're running with them. So that kind of puts it in, if it feels like you're just handing it off to others and they're doing the hard stuff and you really aren't doing things and they're in control, then I can imagine that that feels to me like that, that's sort of a sad future. But if it's something where you're in control and you can now do more and you get to really understand and figure out how much you want to be looking at the code. I mean, one of the things about DevSwarm, how we built it, why we built it, is you were jumping around to different things that are happening and you were looking at the code. You're reviewing the actual code. You can do that as much or as little as you want. And to your point, I think one of the contexts is this a small, simple task? Well, you don't have to pay as much attention to what the code looks like if you can kind of skim it and feel a level of confidence. As the team has been using it, that's something that comes up a lot, is you start getting familiar with what it the Claude Code, Codex, Gemini Code Assist, what they're able to do and what you can ask it and how much you need to review. If it's something that's more complex, you're probably going to need to pay more attention to it. And you can jump right to the code itself and make direct modifications to it. You can see the diffs right in DevSwarm. And as of this week, you can just see all your Jira tickets assigned to you, and you can open builders on different branches instantly with just clicking on those different Jira tickets.
Right. And as you look at your kind of evolving product or feature roadmap going forward, I mean, you all just launched a few weeks ago, and what are some of the initial reactions that folks are sharing with you, and sort of what are some of the things that are desired next steps when it comes to additional growth of the platform and additional features and functionality?
Yeah, I think we've talked to a number in the last 3 weeks that what we've had some comments that this is the best thing that they've seen out there, and these are people that are senior software developers and trying out different products in the space. And on the one hand, that feels good to have something that is ahead of its time. At the same time, now the focus is how to get the word out there.
Mhm.
One of the places that we see that in the analytics is one of my favorite charts is how essentially how many people are using it 2 or more hours per day. And that number continues to go up. And, we I see that as sort of the one of the key criteria of not only are people logging in, checking it out, seeing it, downloading it, but they're using it. And that's really the key of this, is becoming the main primary tool of how they do software development. You can one click and open your IDE of choice. You can jump into Cursor or Windsurf. You can use some of the existing CLI tools like Claude Code directly within. That's kind of one of the core interfaces and features to it. These things that some of the velocity obsessed developers, as we call them, they're the ones that really take that and run with it. At the same time, yeah, there's AMP. You can do things locally with Aider or Goose that point to things like Quen 3. And so you can run it fully locally without the internet. And as you know, part of the reason that we thought that that was an important thing to do is because even if local isn't quite there yet for some of the needs and tasks, it's moving really quickly. And yeah, powerful devices, these more powerful models, these more specific models, it's in the I don't even think more than a year. I think it's going to be in the matter of months before some software development can really be done locally.
Are there certain types of teams that you're targeting and/or are where you're seeing a lot of uptake in terms of size or stage of company or organization? What does your kind of emerging ideal customer profile look like?
I think one that we're noticing is, and this sort of comes to the more general trend of vibe coding, Vibe coding, the term came around about 7 or 8 months ago. And the whole point was, hey, in the weekend, I was just as like I was programming with vibes. I don't even care about the code, but just sort of kind of throwing things into there and code is produced. And that to me is like a perfect definition of vibe coding. It's great for rapid prototypes. It's great for non-technical people coming up with ideation. That's a wonderful use case for it. But also see a lot of people talking and thinking about vibe coding going to production and being used in actual things that have databases, security needs. You've also read about things where, yeah, when you have risks and vibe coded apps get out there, and then you have security breaches where people's data are lost. That's a problem. And when if the focus of vibe coding is to not look at the code, is to sort of run with that and say, hey, I don't care about the code. I don't really know how to look at the code. That's for a different purpose. And so really, we're at the opposite end of the spectrum where we're saying the code matters. DevSwarm is all about moving more quickly and creating the code, but still being able to easily look at the code at every step of the way. You're pushing pull requests, you're having other people review them, all those software development practices, but just smoother and faster. That smoothness is really the focal point of what we're doing, what we're talking about. And we have a different name for that side of things. And that's high velocity engineering. High velocity engineering, or hive coding, is what we think of as essentially the opposite of vibe coding. There's still AI first coding. You're still using prompts and having it modify the code base, but all the practices that come around with using robust MCP servers, pushing PRs, using some of the tools, the QA practices, Code Rabbit, whatever those tools are, it is about the code mattering, about sort of a level of understanding scalability, infrastructure as code, doing things that essentially software engineers think about a lot, but just be able to do it more efficiently and more quickly. And we've had comments from our team who have been using it to build itself and some of our other projects, just that they've never been able to move this quickly by far. They've been able to do certain things. And think I think the biggest one we had was one of our developers saying that they could do something in a day that used to take them a month and a half. And that's just if you can break the thing up in the right way, sort of this parallel development, this high velocity engineering. It's a different discipline. It's a new set of practices, and it's still being understood and thought about. And in my mind, this is a new methodology. This is, you have waterfall, you have agile. High velocity engineering, this hive coding mentality, is a whole new set of tools, ways to work together, because there are a lot of things that you get for almost free, and the bottlenecks completely change when that happens. Things that used to take a lot of time are now almost immediate, but that doesn't mean everything's immediate. And you still have to have these gates, these places to understand, okay, what does it mean in terms of testing it and understanding correctness and how the human fits into this. And so this new methodology, which I think is still yet to be fully defined as these tools come into play, that to me is where I'm really focused on and interested in.
And you've been spending a lot of time, back and forth between Oregon and the Bay Area. And I'm wondering, what are some of your impressions, given how hot the kind of AI startup market is in the Bay Area, and it's been attracting more talent back from places like Austin and others, where people feel like if they're doing foundational level AI, they need to be doing it in person together in the Bay Area. So I'm wondering, what are your thoughts and impressions, and how has it been going so far?
Yeah, it's such a short flight. If I can wake up in Eugene and be at Shack 15 by 9 a.m., just running into people who are leading new companies, doing new things, and just having, a 5 or 10 minute conversation about something, learning, a lot of things just so quickly, trying to hit that critical mass. That's, I think, the thing I've noticed the most. I'm always a fan of being able to run into really sharp people, both to think about like where the product is going. What are the things, are there ways for us to connect with other tools and systems to just make it easier? Our North Star is really about keeping the developer front and center. This is their command center, not to jump to a bunch of different places, but have everything in one place so that they can do that and have that flexibility and customizability with it. And when you are sort of at at different events in San Francisco or in Portland, and getting to talk with people and hear what they think to sort of level of detail of, oh, you should really talk to this person who has a company that's, it's creating context 7, and context 7 is allows for the best documentation to be, connected up. And you think, okay, what does that look like? How do we plug that in? How do we work with it? Both just as an agency doing software development and wanting to use the best practices, but also can we make it easier as as a tool, as a development environment to be able to give that to others? What are the best practices that we find in terms of QA and automated QA, about acceptance tests, about test-driven development, which is even more important now that you have this sort of level of automation of code generation, code delivery. So
And oh, go ahead.
yeah, so the Bay Area ecosystem, any given night, you have multiple events that you can go to and choose from, and I think that's one of the things that stands out, is there are just so many, choices and opportunities on that front. I think Portland has a similar amount, and yeah, it's amazing just in the last few years seeing sort of a revitalization, that sort of sense in Portland as well.
Yeah, that's really great to hear. And I was talking with a friend of mine earlier today who works for a Silicon Valley based company, and has spent a bunch of time obviously here and in the Bay Area. And his observation was that there's a bit more of sort of focus around companies that need to raise a lot of money out of the gate to be able to build that initial kind of foundational model. If you're going to do that approach, the Bay Area makes some sense, at least at the initial stages. But as a company starts to get traction and scale, his observation was a place like, Oregon makes a lot more sense because you can be in the Bay Area on a day trip and get connected to all the various folks you need to, and then be back in time in the evening. And you don't have to essentially assume all the same costs. But I was wondering, has your impressions of kind of the relationship between the Oregon ecosystem and the Bay Area changed at all, and the amount of time you've been spending down there recently?
I I love being able to live and be in Oregon and be able to jump down there, to your point, just being able to feel like it's just a neighbor, that you can hop down there and feel like it's pretty much just sort of an area where you can jump down to events, and it makes it more easy for those things to happen. I think the one of the one of the things that, as you mentioned, Oregon is a wonderful place to have a team, develop a company. It there there's also, as you mentioned, sometimes it's nice not to be there 100% of the time in the Bay
Hmm.
Area, because there are so many things happening. It depends on what things are being created. Not everyone is trying to create an LLM from from scratch. You don't need a lot of giant LLMs or huge amounts of funding for every type of company. And so that sort of allows a level of, hey, we can do what we're doing, and DevSwarm is we're bootstrapping it. We're lucky enough to be able to do that, and we can we have a team of 15 that is moving forward really quickly, more quickly than I've ever experienced in my life, as on sort of as a coder, as a CTO, as a CEO. And so that changes the dynamics of, the speed that you can do. And as we've noticed, and we've been surprised at talking with others at conferences, at some of the big sort of AI conferences, AI4, the AI conference down in San Francisco, one of the things that is a big surprise is when talking to developers, hey, what do you use? What are you doing? There are a lot that are still on Cursor. They haven't tried Claude Code. They haven't tried OpenAI Codex. And of the few people that have worked with Claude Code and done those, they they definitely are the ones that are the most likely to go, oh wow, yeah, I can see how DevSwarm would make this, a much better experience. But we're still in early times, and that's sort of the reminder of there are early adopters that are able to really understand, engage these things, and then move that much more quickly than others. And asking the right questions, being able to use the right tools, and that's something that building this type of tool, yeah, we need to move extremely fast, especially being bootstrapped. But it also feels like we're able to do that. And we have a pretty clear vision of of where DevSwarm goes, of how it rolls out into different features and sort of that full development ecosystem.
Nice. And as we start to wind our conversation down, I was wondering if there's any recent books you've read or podcasts you're listening to that you found particularly helpful as you're navigating this space. Any recommendations for our listeners?
Yeah, I have a few that I enjoy. So, Masters of Scale podcast, the that's one that talks a lot about scaling systems, scaling companies and businesses, and just the thinking around that. But also in a way that thinks about the purpose of what is this business out there to do and to provide. Yeah, Bob Safian, I was lucky enough to he hooked me up with a ticket for the Master Scale Summit, so I'll be there next week attending it in San Francisco. Moonshots is another one. Podcast Peter Diamandis, he always is talking about very interesting things on the innovation side. And this is sort of, some of these things, sometimes you have to think about where things are going over 5 or 10 years, how these things could play out in order to get a sense of what strategies, what you should think about now if that is the case. And it's really easy if you're sort of in your day-to-day, not thinking about where those go. Loonshots was a fun book about sort of very, very difficult moonshots and sort of the a lot of some very interesting origin stories and what some of the ingredients and commonality between those origin stories. And I just got a book, The Thinking Machine, about NVIDIA that just arrived today. So yeah, another one.
Nice. Those are all great ones. Thanks for sharing those. And as we wrap up, any final words of wisdom?
Yeah, I think a lot about AI and innovation and where things are going. Yeah, as I mentioned before, we're not closing Pandora's box with this, and so the only question is, how do we make sure that our how as a society we are making sure that the abundance that comes from AI is spread amongst all of us relatively evenly, and so it's not something that ends up at the top. And that's going to be, I think, one of the key questions over the next 5 years of how does that play out. And yeah, I would love to talk more just about that as that unfolds.
Well, that sounds like an awesome topic for another podcast episode. Yeah, there's a lot to unpack on that one. Well,
Yep.
Mike, thanks for taking some time out of your busy schedule to join us. We really appreciate it, and hope you have a good rest of your day.
Excellent. You too. Thank you, Skip.
That's a wrap on this episode of Techlandia, the podcast, where innovation meets insight. If you enjoyed today's conversation, don't forget to follow us, leave a review, and share it with your fellow tech explorers. You can follow us at techoregon.org for updates and more tech-fueled content. Until next time, stay curious, stay connected, and keep building the future.